Hi, you're on the Reddit Confessions channel. Buckle up, because I never imagined I'd be telling the internet how my wife looked me straight in the eye and asked for permission to sleep with another man. As if it were something casual, like borrowing the car or picking up almond milk. But that's exactly what she did. And I didn't shout. I didn't even cry. Instead, I gave her two unthinkable choices. And what followed? Neither of us saw it coming. It all started with a blue sticky note. Yeah, a sticky note. I found it wedged between the pages of her old planner. The one she keeps in her craft drawer, under the felt scraps and dried-out glue sticks. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for scissors, believe it or not. But there it was, stuck on a page dated 3 weeks ago. Mason, Thursday, Hotel R. That one square of paper had handwriting too perfect to be innocent. I stood there for a solid minute like I was frozen in a glitch. Who the hell writes a hotel name like a grocery item? Who plans a betrayal in bullet points? I didn't confront her right away. I didn't want to walk into the usual lies. It's for a friend. Or, you're being paranoid again, Dorian. Instead, I waited. I let her think I didn't know. I paid attention. That same night, she came home humming. Humming. Like she'd just won a prize. She kissed me on the cheek, poured herself a glass of wine, and said, "Can we talk?" I said sure. She sat down across from me, folded her legs, and without flinching, without shame, she said, "I want a night away, with someone else. I need to feel something different, just once." She said it like she was asking for a break from routine, like it wasn't a nuclear bomb in the middle of our living room. Couldn't even breathe. I wish I could tell you I stormed out, or delivered some heroic line. But all I managed to say was, "Why?" And her answer, "Because I feel like I'm fading," she said. "And he makes me feel invisible." So I was right. She stared at me with those glassy eyes, like I was supposed to understand, like I should applaud her bravery for saying it out loud. Instead, I stood up, walked to the kitchen, poured water I didn't even want, and when I turned back around, I gave her two options. Option 1. She could have her night, but she'd never see me again after it. I'd be gone by morning. Option 2. She could stay and we'd start over, after she erased him completely. She didn't answer, but she did something far worse. And that's when everything really began to unravel. She didn't flinch. That was the part that broke me the most. After I gave her the two options, either go and lose me or stay and cut him off, she just sat there, blinking slowly, like I had presented her with a dinner menu instead of a moral fork in the road. I waited. My hand was clenched around the edge of the countertop so hard that I felt the wood digging into my palm. She tilted her head. And then, as if I had offered her a third option she imagined for herself, she said, "Can I think about it for a couple of days?" I should have said no. I should have told her that when your partner asks for time to decide between loyalty and infidelity, the decision's already been made. But I was weak. I nodded, told her she had 48 hours. That was me still playing the role of the patient husband. The understanding one. The one who gets stepped on quietly and never makes a scene. That night I didn't sleep. I laid in bed while she showered in the next room, imagining the water washing away whatever guilt she barely felt. I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember when things shifted. Maybe it was when I started working longer hours. Maybe it was when we stopped holding hands in public, or when dinners turned into eating in front of separate screens. But then I remembered, I had offered to go to her gallery show last month, and she told me it was too crowded and not really my thing. That must have been his night. Mason's. The next day she acted completely normal. Made coffee, asked if I wanted almond milk or cream, even kissed me on the cheek. I almost gagged. I watched her walk around the kitchen in that oversized t-shirt she always wore on weekends, and I thought, she thinks this is a negotiation. She thinks I'll cave. So I started preparing. I backed up my files, hid my passport, moved some savings into an account she didn't know about. I wasn't planning revenge. I just needed control. Because when someone you love asks if they can betray you gently and expects applause for their honesty, that's not a conversation anymore. That's war. On the second night, she came home later than usual. I asked if she'd made her decision. She sat down slowly, looked me straight in the eye and said, "I've made a reservation for Saturday night." That was it. Not "I choose you." Not "I'm sorry." Just that. I nodded silently. She didn't realize it then, but she'd made both choices at once. Because by the time she came back from her night with Mason, she would find out exactly what her decision had cost. And not just from me. Something else had already been set in motion. Saturday came faster than I wanted it to. I had always thought time crawled when you were anxious or heartbroken. But this felt different. It rushed at me like a train I couldn't step off of. I watched her get ready that evening like she was heading to a dinner party. Not an act of betrayal. She wore a green dress I hadn't seen in years. I used to love that dress. It hugged her shoulders and made her look like the woman I fell in love with. But that night it looked like a costume, worn for a role I had been replaced in. I didn't ask her where she was going. She didn't offer details. I just stood in the hallway, arms crossed, while she adjusted her earrings in the mirror. At one point, she glanced at me and said, "I'll be back late. You don't have to wait up." Like I was her roommate, or worse, her father. It was casual cruelty, and she didn't even notice. The moment the door shut behind her, I sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor. I didn't cry. I'd done all that already. I just felt erased, like a part of me had been lifted out of the life I'd built, and someone else was stepping into my place. But I wasn't just going to let it happen. No, I'd already set everything up. Earlier that week, I had called someone I never thought I'd reach out to again. Caleb, my brother. We hadn't spoken much in years. There was a fallout over a family inheritance, long story. But when I told him what was going on, he didn't hesitate. He was the kind of guy who believed in justice, even the messy kind. "You're not burning her house down," he warned. "But you sure as hell don't have to leave it spotless for her either." He helped me pack. Helped me move essentials into a storage unit an hour out of town. But most importantly, he helped me install a camera. One she didn't know about. Not to spy on her night, I had no interest in that level of self-torture. No, the camera was placed in the hallway, angled at the front door. I needed proof. Not for court, not for divorce proceedings, I just needed something undeniable. Because part of me still didn't believe she'd really go through with it. But she did. At 12:23 a.m., the front door opened. I was already gone by then, sitting in a diner 2 towns over, sipping stale coffee and waiting for the app on my phone to buzz. And it did. She came home alone, hair tousled, makeup smudged. She didn't look happy. She didn't look guilty either, just tired. She sat on the couch, checked her phone, then leaned back and stared at the ceiling. I watched through the feed for exactly 2 minutes. Then I closed the app. I didn't need to see more. She thought I'd be asleep in our bed. She thought things would return to normal, just with a few secrets tucked away behind a polite smile. But that's when she saw it. The note. I had left it folded on her pillow, with her wedding ring beside it. And that was only the beginning of what I left behind. The note wasn't poetic or dramatic. It didn't quote Shakespeare or cry out for justice. I kept it plain, cold, even. I wanted her to understand the weight of her choice without giving her anything to twist or argue against later. It read, "You chose your night. I chose my future. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I meant what I said. You don't get both." Next to it sat her wedding ring, exactly where her head should have rested. Not on the dresser. Not in a drawer. Right there on the pillow. Because I wanted her to feel it before she even read the words. I wanted the absence to hit first. Later, I learned from Caleb that she'd called me 15 times that night. The calls didn't come through. I'd already changed my number. She sent 2 emails, both titled "Please," and one long rambling voice memo where she sounded more confused than remorseful. But I didn't listen to it until days later. I wasn't ready to hear her voice again. I was too busy rediscovering the sound of my own thoughts without her noise drowning them out. I had moved into a rental cabin near Birch Hollow. Off-season. Quiet. There were mornings when I'd wake up thinking I was back home, that she'd roll over and mumble something about needing coffee. Then reality would flood in like ice water. I'd remember that she traded our vows for a night with a man who probably didn't even care enough to ask her favorite color. What shocked me most wasn't that she did it. It was how little effort she made to stop me once she realized I was serious. Maybe deep down she thought I'd cool off. Maybe she thought she could still steer the ship once the storm passed. But I wasn't bluffing. I'd been a ghost in my own marriage for months. Now I was learning how to live as a ghost in someone else's world. 1 week later, she sent a handwritten letter. She always believed paper carried more meaning. It smelled like her perfume, something floral and fake. In the letter, she didn't apologize for the night itself. She apologized for how it made me feel, which is the most rehearsed and useless apology anyone can give. She said she thought we were stronger than one night. That's when I knew she didn't get it. She still believed the betrayal was the act, not the planning, not the rehearsing, not the months of drifting into another man's emotional orbit and then casually asking for permission to crash into him. She ended the letter with, "I don't know who we are now." I read that line over and over again. I wanted to write back, "We're nothing," but instead I let silence speak. Meanwhile, Caleb suggested we go to a nearby bar just to get out of the cabin. I wasn't in the mood to talk to anyone, but I needed something to replace the loop in my head. That was the night everything shifted, because someone at that bar recognized her name. And what he told me next made my blood run cold. It turned out my wife hadn't just had one night in mind. She'd been lying long before she asked permission. The bar wasn't anything special. Dim lights, sticky floors, and the kind of jukebox that still played scratched country ballads no one asked for. Caleb ordered us both something dark and bitter. I didn't argue. I was just grateful for the noise. For once, I didn't want to think. I didn't want to feel. I just wanted to sit in a room where nobody knew me as the man who got left behind. But fate has a twisted sense of humor. About 30 minutes in, Caleb struck up a casual conversation with a guy sitting 2 stools down. His name was Owen, mid-40s, buzz cut, too many tattoos to count. He worked in commercial lighting and apparently did installations for local galleries. My ears perked up at that. When he mentioned Talitha's gallery, I froze. I hadn't heard anyone say her name out loud since I left. It sounded too familiar and too foreign all at once. Caleb, either oblivious or testing me, asked if Owen knew her. Know her? Owen laughed. Yeah, man. The gallery's practically her second home. Or third, depending on who you ask. That line made my stomach twist. I turned slightly toward him, careful not to look too desperate. What do you mean? I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. Owen took a swig of his drink and shrugged. It's none of my business, but people talk. Especially when the same guy keeps showing up at every show, hanging around long after everyone's gone. Mason something. You know how it is. Artist types. Emotional and messy. The words hit like bricks. I'd spent weeks convincing myself that her betrayal had been a moment of weakness, that she'd gotten swept up in some temporary fantasy and acted impulsively. But now I was hearing confirmation of something much worse. This wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't a single night. It was a slow-motion crash, and she'd been driving the whole time with her eyes open. I didn't ask more. I didn't want to hear about how she looked at Mason when she thought no one was watching, or whether they'd ever been caught before. I just nodded and excused myself to the bathroom, where I sat in a stall for 10 minutes, trying to keep my breathing under control. Later that night, I walked alone by the lake near the cabin. The wind was biting, and the stars above looked indifferent. I thought about how Talitha used to say the sky always looked lonelier in places without buildings. She was right, but maybe loneliness was the price of clarity. I realized then that I hadn't just lost a partner. I'd lost the version of myself I used to be when she loved me. The man who built a porch with his bare hands because he thought it would become the backdrop of their forever. That man didn't exist anymore. Still, something inside me refused to let her walk away without knowing the full weight of what she'd done. Not with drama, not with cruelty, but with precision. She'd asked for honesty. Now I was going to give it to her. And I knew exactly how. The next morning, I drove back to the house. Not to see her, but to leave her something. A final message. One she couldn't ignore, delete, or pretend not to understand. I slipped it into a box and left it on the front step with no name, no return address. Just a seal across the top and a sentence burned into wood. You said you needed one night. This was mine. Because inside that box wasn't just my ring or the note. It was something else. Something that would shatter the illusion she built and force her to face the truth she'd buried for months. The box wasn't elegant. It was a weathered old cigar case I had kept for years, tucked away in the attic with a few keepsakes I once considered sentimental. At the time, I didn't know why I chose it. Maybe because it looked like something you'd bury rather than gift. Maybe because what I was giving her wasn't really a gift at all. Inside, I placed the note she hadn't read properly the first time. Then, underneath it, I added the USB drive. I had labeled it with her name, not out of spite, but because I wanted her to know it was meant specifically for her eyes. No guessing. No misunderstanding. The contents of that drive weren't cruel, just carefully curated. Audio clips from the voice memo she had sent me after her night away. Snippets of her trying to justify it to herself, recorded and edited down to just the moments that revealed how calculated it had all been. I also included screenshots, messages from her email to Mason, pulled from our shared laptop before I left. She hadn't even cleared her drafts. I wasn't looking to expose her publicly. I didn't share them with anyone but her. But I wanted her to see herself the way I saw her now. Not as a woman who made a single mistake, but as someone who lied with calm, practiced ease. The final file was a photo, taken from the front door camera the night she came home. She stood in the hallway with her shoes in her hand, eyes puffy, mascara smudged. Not glamorous, not confident, just used. I thought that image captured the truth better than anything else ever could. I didn't stick around to see her reaction. I placed the box on the porch early in the morning while the street was still dark and empty, then drove off without even glancing back. I thought I'd feel triumphant, maybe even a little smug, but instead I felt hollow, like I had just closed a chapter so heavy it cracked the spine of my entire story. Later that day, Caleb texted me one word. She called. I didn't respond. He followed up with, "Did you leave her something?" I replied, "Only what she earned." That night, she emailed me again. Subject line, "What's left to say?" I didn't open it. Instead, I poured myself a drink, sat by the fire pit behind the cabin, and stared into the flames. There's something haunting about watching fire eat away at wood. It's slow, deliberate, and final. I imagined that's how our marriage had gone. Not one big explosion, but a quiet burn she never thought I'd feel until there was nothing left but ash. 2 days passed, then 3, then the silence broke. Not from her, but from someone else. An unknown number texted me with a message I never expected to read. "We need to talk. It's about Talitha and Mason." That was the moment I realized the story wasn't over. She thought she'd closed the door with that one night. But some doors don't stay shut when there's fire behind them. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. The number wasn't saved in my contacts and the tone of the message felt oddly urgent, like whoever was on the other end knew something they shouldn't. I ignored it for a while. I wasn't in the mood to be dragged into more drama. I had done my part, drawn my line, and walked away. But curiosity has a cruel persistence, especially when you've just started patching up the edges of your life. The message came again the next day. "I wouldn't reach out if it wasn't serious. You deserve to know what he's been saying. Mason isn't who you think he is." That was enough to make me respond with a simple, "Who is this?" A few minutes later, a reply came. Her name was Harper. She said she was Mason's ex-fiancée. They were together for nearly 4 years, engaged for 1, and had only broken things off 2 months ago. I stared at that text, jaw tight. 2 months ago. That would mean Talitha had started seeing Mason while he was still technically engaged. Harper asked to talk on the phone. I agreed, hesitantly, half expecting it to be a mistake or a prank. But the second she spoke, I could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the kind of ache that only comes from betrayal. She told me that Mason had a pattern, that Talitha wasn't his first affair, not even close. Apparently, he had a reputation for attaching himself to vulnerable women, especially married ones. He'd romanticized the secrecy, Talk about liberating them from dull lives. And once he got what he wanted, he'd move on. Harper had found old messages on his tablet after he'd left it unlocked. She read me one of them. It was from Talitha. "I'm scared, but also alive again. He doesn't look at me like you do. He looks at me like I matter." That sentence made my throat go dry. I remembered the way Talitha used to say I looked at her like I was afraid to blink, like she was art and I didn't want to miss a detail. And somehow that had become not enough. Harper went on. Mason had ghosted her without explanation. One day he was planning wedding venues with her. The next he was avoiding calls and suddenly reconnecting with an old friend, which we both now knew was a lie. When she saw his name in the local art blog with Talitha's gallery, she put it all together. And she reached out not to stir the pot, but because she said I deserved to know what kind of man my wife had risked everything for. When the call ended, I sat on the porch for a long time, letting the cold evening air cut through my thoughts. She had thrown away a decade for someone who had discarded his own fiancée like she was a forgotten sketch. And now that Talitha had finally gotten what she asked for, she was left with a man who'd already moved on emotionally before the night even ended. But I wasn't done yet. She thought the silence meant closure. She thought I had faded into the distance like a bitter memory. But now I had a new reason to reach out. One final confrontation. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to ruin her life or expose Mason to the world. I just wanted peace. But peace doesn't always come from silence. Sometimes it comes from clarity. From facing the person who hurt you not to hurt them back, but to make sure they understand what they destroyed. So I sent her one last message. No venom, no accusations, just truth. I told her I had spoken with Harper. I told her I knew Mason's game, that she hadn't been chosen because she was special. She had been selected because she was available, vulnerable, willing. I told her I hoped one day she would understand the difference. I didn't say I forgave her. I didn't promise anything. But I did say this. You asked for a night to feel alive. I took the rest of my life to actually live. She never replied. Maybe because she knew there was nothing left to say. Maybe because, deep down, she had already realized she bet everything on someone who was only ever passing through. It's been 6 months since that night. I still live in the cabin, but it's not temporary anymore. I repainted the porch, replaced the old sink that always leaked, and started taking photos again. Something I hadn't done since before the marriage. Turns out I'm not bad at it. I even joined a local photography group, which is where I met Elise. She's quiet, laughs at my awkward jokes, and never once made me feel like I was an option to be weighed against someone else. We're taking things slow. Not everything needs to move fast to be real. Looking back, Talitha gave me a strange kind of gift. Her betrayal cracked the foundation of a life I thought was solid. But it also forced me to rebuild not from grief but from truth. And this time I'm building something stronger. To everyone watching, thank you for staying with me through this. If you've ever been through something similar, you're not alone. And I'd love to hear from you. What's one moment in your life that felt like the end, but turned out to be a beginning? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every one of them. And don't forget, you're on Reddit Confessions, where every story leaves a mark. Until next time, stay honest, stay strong, and remember, sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you'll ever do.